Shall I start again?
Yes, please.
Okay. I'm going to start again because these are new and I hadn't noticed the button you have to press. A warm welcome to those attending and also to our viewers watching live on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon, London. This is a meeting of the Corporate Resources and Infrastructure Select Committee. My name is Councillor John Riley and I'm the chairman of this meeting. A key role of this committee is to monitor the performance of local public services within our remit and to hold in-depth reviews on topics of resident interest. We engage with a range of external witnesses in our activity, which can include community groups, residents, and subject matter experts. Where we identify areas for change or improvement, we also make recommendations to the decision-making cabinet. Details of the business to be considered today are shown on the agenda, copies of which are accessible on YouTube underneath the broadcast. Please note that members of the committee may be using tablets or laptops or even phones to view the agenda today. We are not expecting a fire drill, so that if the fire alarm does go off, please follow officers to the nearest fire exits out of the building to the designated meeting points. For those in the room, please switch any mobile devices to silent before the meeting starts. For those watching via YouTube, if you're so minded, you can complete one of our resident feedback forms. These can be found in the information section underneath the YouTube video. These forms are intended to help us improve the way in which we run our meetings, like me pressing the button so that everyone can hear us. We now move on to those people who are in this room and in the meeting. And if we can introduce ourselves, we'll start with our Democratic Services Officer and then go around the table.
Anisha Tedji, Democratic Services. We also have Mark Preston attending virtually. I don't know if you want to introduce yourself, Mark.
Councillor Stuart Mathers.
Councillor Narinda Golg.
Councillor Elizabeth Garelick.
Kirsty Newham, Emergency Management and Response Service Manager.
Gary Pentecost, Director of Operational Assets.
Richard Webb, Director of Community Safety and Enforcement.
Councillor Farhad Chubdar.
Councillor Kaushik Banerjee.
And Councillor Adam Bennett.
All right, thank you very much. These are very smart new microphones, and everyone will remember to press the button, and the buttons are a lot easier to press than the old ones. Excellent, good. So, on to the agenda. So, item 1, apologies for absence.
No apologies.
Thank you. Declarations of interest, all the usual ones, so unless anyone's got anything specific. Minutes of the previous meeting, which was very interesting. I couldn't get here because I was working away in Stafford, and Councillor Bennett was also on work duty, so I'm very grateful to Councillor Banerjee for taking over and chairing the meeting. So just for this section, because you dealt with it and dealt with the events and will know the minutes, anybody got any issues about those minutes that they want to run past Councillor Banerjee? Nope. All right, and I'm grateful to everyone who stood in. It says in the minutes that Councillor Hector Gohill was in place of Councillor Hector Gohill. In fact, she was in place of me because Councillor Banerjee chaired and she stood in for me, so I'm grateful to her for that. Councillor Smallwood was here standing in for Councillor Bennett. But from reading the minutes, it was a very interesting meeting. And a lot of interesting work and good work was done. So if everyone's agreed with those, everyone agreed? Excellent, thank you very much. We then move on to, and I think this is the first time in this committee I've ever done this, to confirm that the items of business marked in Part 1 will be considered in public, and those items marked in Part 2, of which we have one, which is quite exciting, will be considered in private, but we'll come to that later. All right. So we now get to item 5 on our agenda, which is the Building Safety Strategy Annual Monitoring Report. And I think it's Gary and Mike are dealing with that one. Who's going first?
Gary, Councillor. So I'll give a quick run through this. Our annual report on building safety, our building safety strategy. The document, the main building strategy document, is due for review in 2025, which will be taking place later this year. There's a number of documents in the appendixes associated with. Appendix A is the main building strategy document. Then we've got our fire door residence information packs, our stay-put policy of housing in high-rise buildings, the safety case as an example of the Fairley House, which is a pack of information provided, and our housing management strategy. Unfortunately, a colleague from tenancy management was unable to be here this evening, but I can run through and try and cover any questions that might be raised. I'm happy to run through the report. It's a very similar format to that I presented in last year. Obviously, building safety and fire safety generally is always evolving. There's a number of linked presentations and reports coming this evening around building safety generally. I've got the main issue for us, all our high-rise buildings are still considered low risk. We are doing a review, picking up any new amendments to requirements for the regulator. Over the coming few years, we will be demolishing 4 of our high-rise buildings which haven't received sprinklers. However, as mentioned previously, all of those buildings have all of the other safety measures applied, with the exception of sprinklers. So 7 out of the 11 now. Bearing in mind we purchased a new high-rise building in the late summer last year. Again, it's so measures are applicable to the new building. In fact, that's got 3 means of escape, a sprinkler system installed, an evacuations system. Again, generally we purchased that, which is a good quality building. I'm open to any. As I said last year, I'm quite proud of the work that the team are doing on fire safety generally, and the council has been leading this since the tragic event at the Grenfell fire with a lot of our works programmes. So again, I'm open to any comments, questions, any issues.
Councillor Jupiter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to say I've read the report and I note what you've done, and I wanted to just express my thank you for all the good work you've done.
Thank you, Councillor. It's appreciated.
Councillor Garlick.
Thank you, Chair. I just got a general question about the safety strategy. Yeah. Because at the other meeting last year, properties and infrastructure were presented with this. And at that time you mentioned that it's a live document, it's being updated all the time. So are there any major differences? Because what I've noticed about the targets, sort of amber and green, are still the same as they were 12 months ago. Are there any major differences to those?
There's no major differences, Councillor, other than as I tried to explain last year, we've got there's 4 elements, which is the pre-design element, then the design, then the planning sign off and building control, then the maintenance, then the management via our tenancy. The documents are quarterly, updated quarterly, and I think it's a valid point. As I say, there's a couple of items on there which appear to be stagnant, and I've asked for a review of that as part of our review for this year, because the document expires later this year. So it's to confirm whether those items are always going to be read if we can't move them. Yeah, so it's just trying to confirm whether, as I've asked for colleagues to confirm why we can't move those items on. But there's no red items, as I understand from what I can recall on the report. They're mainly amber, which is a slowing in the assessment process, and we are working with our colleagues in the building control department to pick up on issues that no doubt is going to come up in your Grenfell inquiry, that there are a number of issues around some builders not complying with all the requirements of the Building Safety Act, which is an issue. But I'll take your point, and I will, as a separate, I can give you an update on those other items, which should be, as I say, moved on quarterly.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Councillor Mathers.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. It is appreciated, and it's clear this is a priority and has been a priority for a number of years. I guess I'm interested in some of the moving parts. So you're reviewing the strategy. Human behaviour is one of the areas for me that, as good as you do the buildings, if behaviour doesn't change, the risk is, there may be less of a risk to responding to the fire, but the risk of fire is still there. And I know that a lot of the high-rises are in Ella's and I ward, and there's been a lot of work by the police and social behaviour team to make sure that security access in the high-rises is much more robust to stop people who aren't residents being in the building, and there are orders, there are protection orders to prevent that, because that was being a risk of fire as well as damage and theft, etc. So with the tenancy management, I know this isn't fully under our remit as a committee. It would be useful to know, kind of, with the changes to kind of tenancy management, tenancy communication, and the kind of dialogue between the council and council tenants, kind of what advantages that new strategy might have in terms of talking about behaviour, reporting, the touch points. And we've had Matthew here for a number of weeks, months, years, for a long time in this committee, who's talked to us about the use of technology and progressing AI and other aspects. So what other things may be on the horizon in terms of early detection, intelligence, and other bits and pieces to prevent that initial fire?
That's a good question. We've got all the traditional measures in for assessing fires. As we said before, we've got our we have to report any defects that occur to the fire service to make sure that if they are attending fires, they're aware of anything that's offline, like an AOV, automatic air vent, or the alarm system. So all of our properties have got linked alarms on within the dwellings, and linked alarms to activate smoke detections. They've all got common area fire safe equipment. What we haven't got is any form of electronic sensors for antisocial behaviour. So we are reliant on tenants reporting those issues, and I think Rich's area has confirmed that they are taking real strong action against tenants, against the misuse of the common areas, and we have had a number of situations where antisocial behaviour has led to setting fire to our bin chutes and etc. On a positive, the measures we've had in place have worked, so they've prevented any further, and we're also any further escalation of the fire, which is good. And we're doing all necessary remedial works to prevent. It seems as though for whatever reason, I don't understand the reasoning why they've done it. They just seem to put lighted paper into bin chutes. I don't understand the thought process of that. But in answer to your question, there's no real electronic measures other than vigilance. We have got our caretaking services transferred to my area and repairs now, so we have got our early morning intervention immediately straight onto the blocks. That has a positive effect by notifying Richard's team if there's any issues with regards to people who shouldn't be there, are identified quite quickly and moved on. And I think there was even arrest warrants been issued, so that immediately people can be moved on. It's just about being vigilant. I mean, there's no electronic, from what I understand, there's no electronic solution to pinpoint people misusing. We have got our CCT systems, obviously, which are recording. They can record antisocial behaviour within the block, which is used as evidence. But yeah, in answer to your question, there's no real technology to prevent it, unfortunately. But.
All right. Just to pick up on what Councillor Mathers was saying about human behaviour. In regard to, and bearing in mind to this extent, and I note what you said about, I think, 2 of the blocks that we've got, that we've only got 11 buildings to deal with. And I'm just sort of thinking in terms of different approaches. So we have resident associations for different areas for people to club together and concern themselves about what goes on in their area. Is there do you think there's a sort of possibility of something similar for blocks, in order that I mean, sometimes the behaviour of others is difficult for residents within these blocks to deal with and so forth. But if there was a kind of, and there may be, and I don't know, it doesn't come out in the report, and I echo what Councillor Jupiter says about the good work that your team are doing. But if there was a sort of, a kind of, I don't know, I hate to say collective committee, but some sort of get-together of the residents in these blocks. So there's a feeling of participation and sort of ownership of behaviour within the block that residents in that block can get together on. At the same time as we might have technology to do all sorts of things, I don't think there's a really a good substitute for people getting together and looking at their own environment where they live and trying to do something about it. So that if they saw something going on, they didn't feel intimidated or worried about reporting it, because in the first instance perhaps they reported it to their, I don't know, whatever we want to call it, collective residence, something or other. As I say, I hesitate to call it committee, but nevertheless the group that's kind of got together to worry about these sorts of things and to deal. I mean, for example, in some private blocks you'll have a residence management committee or something like that. And I don't know whether we've looked at the idea of involving the people in the blocks, especially in those where people are going to stay for some time and it's not going to be sort of transient. Because I do recall going to 1 or 2 of these areas in the past, these blocks, and maybe, the corridors have got things in them, children's toys, for example, and in 1 or 2 white goods, because there isn't enough room maybe in the flats and so forth, and that may be not such a great idea. So is there any possibility maybe of the council sort of promoting or encouraging that kind of collective sort of responsibility in these blocks?
A short answer would be yes, but I'd need to talk to our colleagues in tenancy management, because we have got some active tenants who do raise concerns. Hence, I think we've got 2 of our blocks where we seem to have issues, and they're both one of them is definitely a block which is going to be disposed of on demolished in a year or so, 2 years time. And the other ones, we've got similar problems. It is definitely outside people coming in, and some of our tenants are actively raising their concerns. We've also got dedicated housing officers who are engaging with tenants, so that tenants haven't got to have the interaction with people who are misusing the blocks. Yeah. So we have got our tenancy high-rise tenancy officers who specifically deal with tenancy engagement, making sure they're aware of safety measures. If they've got any concerns, those concerns are brought back. If it's a physical building concern, then it's addressed by my teams. If it's an antisocial behaviour team, then it'll be Richard's team who deal with the ASB. But bearing in mind that some of the bulk of our high-rise blocks haven't got antisocial behaviour going on. Picking up on the point earlier, obviously, any materials left impacted on the means of escape are required to be removed, and we actively remove those, issuing notices and putting notices on. People leave their bikes or wheelchairs or whatever it is left in the common areas, they now are required to be removed to stop any form of restriction to the means of escape. But yeah, getting to your point about managing the tenants, really, we've got early morning caretakers picking up issues, and then there's a referral there. Some tenants, in fairness to them, might not want to engage in challenging people, but then we've got our ASB team who are actively engaged in dealing with people causing antisocial behaviour in the block. So it's always good to have resident engagement, and we have got some vocal good tenants who are taking a lot of time and raising issues that they've got with people misusing the block in common areas. Yeah.
One of the post-Grenfell observations or even complaints from residents in phase 1, I think, was that when there was a call for observations from residents, was lack of engagement in the months or years, I suppose, prior to it all happening, and a kind of sense that they weren't, that even when they did engage or try to engage, they weren't being listened to and so forth. But so, and we're in a much better place, I know, than perhaps other areas. But having that capacity, and absolutely, I wasn't suggesting that that residents should try and take anybody on, but if they felt that they had a ready access within their own block community, as it were, to be able to speak to whoever it is at number 8, rather than having to go around the houses possibly, or feel they're going around the houses metaphorically. And then that person, it's a bit like the street champions idea that we had years ago for streets. It kind of, I guess, builds a more a better feeling of engagement and a better feeling of as I say, sort of environment ownership, for want of a better word. And the other thing, of course, is that if there are problems with toys or whatever in the corridors, maybe being able to provide spaces for those sorts of things to be, locked up or stored or something like that at a reasonable level, or with reasonable access, so that people aren't feeling that they can leave them outside like that. That might be another kind of. It's looking for. I think it's looking, because going through the report, you feel looking for small ways to make improvements is probably a good way to go, and sort of small events that just make people's lives a bit better. But it's great to see that all of our 11 are under the low risk category. The priority tier, priority score. Tell me what it means when all are in 5. So is that the lowest category?
Tier 5. So our buildings have been assessed. We're going to reassess them this year. I think it's in the document there. All of our buildings were assessed on the government's assessment portal. There have been some changes in the last year or so, since about September, which has been brought into some additional items that they want to check, and we're just building those items in now to our checks. But generally, this is an assessment based on the criteria set by the government.
All right, Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Chair. 2 questions, if I may. The first one was just on page 7, so just some clarification on the fire door replacement programme, which sounds like a fantastic piece of work in terms of rolling out better grade fire doors across all of our properties, both front doors and communal doors. It says, please see below for the number of door sets replaced in total of 5,674 door sets. But then when you add up the numbers, that is 5,674. So I didn't know if is that the number we've replaced, or is that which is fantastic if we have, or is that the total number and we're some way below that?
That's the total number of doors replaced.
Wow.
If you recall, when we started our programme, which was before the Grenfell tragedy, we started our door replacement programme on the high-rise buildings, and we fast-tracked that. And we've gradually rolled that into sheltered accommodation and rolling through. So we are at 5,600 odd door sets, and the programme continues. Obviously, we're targeting all buildings with enclosed staircases or balconies. And we've got a priority programme, and our aim is to try and complete the programme by 2026. That's the aim, and that would have picked up any buildings that fall within that assessment criteria. But we've also still got all that building, our rise building, our sheltered accommodation have all got annualised fire risk assessments, and then it's risk rated. All the rest of the buildings on the programme. But these are extensive measures, and there's some new guidance. Actually, the policy we've been adopting since day one, which is fully third party accredited door sets, is now being put forward by the fire safety industry about selecting of fire doors and ensuring compliance, because there's so many issues around. Why wouldn't you want fully certified door sets? It seems to be strange. And anyway, that's being started to be formalised now, because it's been law since 2005 about door sets as accredited that should be being installed. So we're ahead of the game, but there's always room for improvement. And picking up one of the earlier points, most of our high-rise blocks have got areas where tenants can store some bulky items, and nearly most of those areas are secured by with fob access in the bottom areas. And we're on one of the blocks in the central area, where we had a number of our residents were disabled with mobility scooters. Then we made it so we created a storage point and a charging point for those mobility scooters to prevent tenants having to. And then colleagues in housing have actually moved now to a policy where if people can't self-evacuate, then they're offered the opportunity to move from the high-rise. So you're removing a risk completely. And then that ties into your personal evacuation plans, which we're still pursuing. I know the government has changed we're still pursuing that, and where required, we're doing them. We're going to be doing them.
Well, thank you. And then the second question was just something you touched on. So we've got 11 council-owned high-rises in the borough. I guess that number will slightly reduce potentially as some come to the end of their life and there's plans to replace. But you mentioned that we'd taken on a new one last year. So my question was just how active are you and your team kind of in the purchase of new properties and the scoping, just so is fire safety at the forefront of everything we're thinking? I think you mentioned one of them had three forms of exit.
In answer to your question, I've recently taken over responsibility for our capital works and our property services division, which leads on buying and selling in properties. And we are extensively involved. My team is extensively involved in the assessment and selection criteria, which led to, as I say, the block we've recently purchased, and the name's escaped me completely now. It was one of those ones where you think we've got three means of escape: sprinkler systems. We did insist on doors being replaced because they couldn't certify that they were compliant, so they've been replaced. An evacuation system, so that is at the pinnacle of all our blocks at the moment. And then we've got 4 blocks that are scheduled for demolition over the coming years, and no doubt their replacements will be just added to our assessment programme. But the new builds will be built to our requirements with regards to fire safety. So that's been quite stringent since we started.
So it's a really good point. I suppose it was mentioned, I think, at the beginning around how fluid building and fire safety is, and much of your job, I imagine, is bringing buildings that are 50, 60 years old up to the acceptable standard. So it must be a joy when you get a new build that then is built to exactly what the standard is today, with everything that we can think of to make it safe.
It is quite a pleasure when you get them, but there are a number of issues, and I think Kirsty might well come on to that in a little while. The HSC have raised concerns with non-compliance with phase 2 of the Grenfell report. It mainly appears to be with in some of some new build properties, but I think generally it's about just that evolution and getting people to work to the recommendations, and our aim is to work to the recommendations. If new recommendations come out, we'll change it and adapt and move on. So that's our aim, to maximise safety all the time.
All right, thank you. Councillor Mathers.
Thank you, Chair. If I may just reflect on the stay put policy. So obviously, Grenfell, it was the building materials that ignited and spread the fire significantly, and the advice was stay put at the time, and that was a very public event, a huge tragedy that many people will have taken to heart, particularly those living in high rises. So my question is, how much engagement, what sort of engagement is happening with existing and future tenants of high rises to reassure, bring trust, and to keep them engaged and informed? Because part of the stay put policy relies on the majority of people unaffected staying in their flats, and if they don't, that creates a greater risk of people getting injured or hurt or worse. So I just wondered kind of what the engagement side was doing to ensure that, obviously, since this huge tragedy a number of years ago, it's very much in people's minds that maybe the right advice isn't necessarily something they want to abide to because of what happened in the past.
That's a really good point. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, all our high-rise buildings have been assessed as low risk because of the measures we've applied. And we're also we've got a dedicated tenancy engagement officer who is constantly speaking with our tenants to make sure if there's any issues that are being addressed and passed over. We've got our own safety inspection team for our in-house DLO workforce who undertake the physical checks of fire doors. So generally, information is being provided on the safe use of fire doors, why they're there in the first place, because high-rise blocks are supposed to be, and ours are contained boxes, which is where you get your stay put fire resistance from. You've got a door that shuts, gives you 30 minutes, then there's a passage, a pathway or exit point to a means of escape, which gives you another 30 minutes, in which time our sprinkler systems would have activated in the point of a fire. And then it's tenants are also advised, if there's a fire and the brigade's still working on a stay put, it'd be in flats are contained. That's the whole point of these doors. They are contained within the property for a minimum of 30 minutes. That's a minimum. And again, it's just about making sure that people are following the rules, that they don't leave doors open when it's a nice hot sunny day, which was I think one of the issues on one of the other tragic fires we had a few years ago. Lacknell was another one. So generally, we are trying to raise awareness amongst the tenants that they have to work with us for safety and have to be helping us with their safety. We're applying all the measures we possibly can to the buildings that we've got, making them as safe as possible. And then they need to help us if there's issues in a block, like we spoke about earlier. If there's issues within the block with antisocial behaviour, then we'll address that as well, and we'll deal with them. But we've got lots and lots of inspections going on. We have our tenancy management officer constantly. They're responsible for the high-rise blocks. I think there's 2 of them in the structure. We've got in my team, we've got a safety inspector, which is constantly checking on the quality of works undertaken. We've got our DL, our direct labour force, which is TRADA registered, certified every 6 months to ensure that the quality of works undertaken is to the required standards. and all our other programs are servicing of sprinkler systems, alarm systems are all under contract. So generally we are, but it's about raising awareness for them. They've got all packs as well. All the tenants there have got packs to confirm if they're new to the block, how they get out of the block in the means of, it's pretty straightforward in the blocks with single means of escape. But on the blocks with three means of escape, we have to make sure they've got that. They're informed of the escape routes. But generally, we've got to inform and give them as much information as possible why we've gone to a stay put policy. And obviously, if they feel there's a fire in the flat, obviously, and they want to escape, then they get out. But normally, it's on a brigade. Brigade will be in attendance and affects the putting the fire out.
All right, Councillor Garlick.
Thank you, Chair. So going back to the previous meeting when you mentioned that a few residents refused sprinklers, installation of the sprinklers, and as I understood, if a sprinkler system is not legally required to be installed in the older buildings. So have you managed to persuade those people, or if there are flats that don't have a system, how do they impact the fire safety strategy?
It's the fire safety strategy. We've got very few tenants that are now have refused it, and where tenants have moved out or moved on to other properties, then we are trying to get into those properties at void stage to upgrade the sprinkler system. But generally, there were some pictures I think in the report where it was done quite nicely. I think the installations were quite aesthetically pleasing, shall we say? But we still had a number of refusals. But generally, the coverage in the block is sufficient at the present time. But we are taking, as soon as someone moves out, we're taking the opportunity to install the sprinklers. So we've got full coverage of all properties.
Do they pose any risks to the other residents?
Potentially, if there was a fire, but with as I said earlier, there was no legal requirement to have the sprinklers installed retrofitted, but we have taken the opportunity to retrofit. We've also got the fire doors which close and contain the fire. We've taken risks out where we've installed smoke alarm systems within the dwelling, so you minimise it. The flats are designed to contain the fire for 30 minutes. But that's a fair point. I mean, it's something I can take back to we have raised with our tenancy team about. In our ideal world, it would be nice to insist that people let us install a sprinkler because it's a safety measure, and I could never understand why it was ever refused personally. So but we are trying to deal with it as people leave or move on.
Well, picking up on that point, it might be an idea perhaps to have a word with the legal department and or the contracts department or tenancy department, because it strikes me that especially, well, notwithstanding, if you can say such a thing, Grenfell, in any event, the very fact that that sprinklers are a good idea for fire mitigation in buildings anyway, it should be part of the tenancy agreement. It should not be capable of being something that can be refused, because not only is it of benefit for the individual tenant, but it's also a kind of benefit for everybody in the block. So if you need our help to push from our side, as it were, but we need to identify the parts of the council that need to press down on that. It should not be an issue, in my view anyway, at least. Everybody else? Everyone's nodding their heads.
I will take that back, Councillor, and see if we can push it on. I think we've been trying to work with residents and tenants to make it happen a lot easier, because obviously some some are leaseholders. Some of the leaseholders have accepted it willingly. A couple of others haven't. So it's something that I will take it back and I'll seek advice.
And again, looking at the report, the subject of the London Fire Brigade and all that's said on page 6 about that, and clearly they play an extraordinary role in all this. And it may be a bit simplistic, but I mean, do they and/or fire safety officers or people that know very much about this, I mean, do they also get involved in resident education, sort of bringing the kind of issues really home to roost as far as fire safety is concerned? I mean, I remember a little while back that we had some police car accident investigators in my other life going to schools, for example, showing the effects of bad driving and crashes and that sort of thing. Presumably the London Fire Brigade involvement, part of which, in some form or another, I'm not necessarily saying operational people, but taking part in education exercises with residents to really bring it home, as it were. If people from the Fire Brigade are telling folks, then maybe they take it on board even more than they do from council officers who know a lot about fire safety. But does that happen?
The fire service do take regular visits to the high-rise blocks to familiarise themselves with the building layout, to make sure the premises information boxes which are installed have got the information on there. So they are quite, and we've had a launch with a brigade as well with our sprinkler installations when they've gone in, so we give them a demonstration how they operate. But yeah, they are quite active, the brigade, in raising awareness and offering free smoke alarms, etc., etc. So they are good, and we work closely with a fire service. If is a requirement on us now, if any of our parts that are linked to fire safety are not working, then we notify them. It's a requirement now. We notify them that it's not working and when we expect it to be reinstated, so that then they can take necessary measures that the smoke alarm might not be working on the 6th floor, and then we update them to confirm it. But generally, they are very, very good, doing lots of free circulars, information being provided. Their website is really good. We use some of their data as well. So yeah, they are good. They are good in providing support.
The other thing was in the little triangle of issues on page 11, built environment, human behaviour. We've dealt with that. What people bring into buildings, is that in terms of things that are hazardous, or things that get in the way, or what?
Everything above. We need to make people aware that they shouldn't be bringing combustible materials, gas, or anything that could cause fire. No charging of raising people tenants' awareness around these e-scooters now, which are some of the cheaper ones that have got issues.
Well, one caused a fire at Rayners Lane, I think, last week or the week before. An e-bike or an e-scooter just blew up, didn't it?
Yeah, unfortunately, they are a bit prone. The brigade are raising. There's a lot of advertising going on about Charge Safe. Yeah, they've got a campaign going on, and it is mainly unfortunately, some of the cheaper products that haven't got, they just overload for whatever reason.
Made in other countries where the regulations aren't the same here.
So yeah, the fire brigade are very proactive with that. So they've got a campaign called Charge Safe, which is all about raising awareness about how to charge and deal with electrical devices like e-scooters, e-bikes safely.
It's with unfortunately sometimes with battery charging and the charging of the rechargeable batteries. if they do ignite or foul, they are extremely difficult to put out in a fire situation. You know, we had one last year on a low-rise block that was caused by PV panels the tenant had fitted, and the batteries were with a battery pack that couldn't be isolated. And the brigade, in fairness to them, they just put it in a containment and dosed it with water till it went out.
Yeah, you can't put them out. A lithium-ion battery will go into thermal runaway, so they can't extinguish the fire. So what they'll do is usually take the item and put it somewhere in water until it runs out of its life itself.
Yeah, I mean, the cheaper ones heat up. That's the problem, isn't it? All right. So on page 41, there's quite management of buildings. There's quite a number of bullet points there about raising awareness, and I mean, a lot of the report is to do with people's understanding, or getting people's understanding to a better level or to a higher level. And when you were answering the questions that Councillor Mather's raised about the sort of staying put policy, I must confess that in the aftermath of Grenfell and all the things that were said, especially in regard to sort of when one watched TV programmes and experts and all that are coming on talking about stay, it's not a natural thing, I don't think, for people to, if they think there's a fire somewhere, to stay in the building where the fire is. I just wonder what sort of, certainly I think in most people's minds, initially at least, you would want to get out, wouldn't you? So to what extent are we being successful? And I read everything that you've said about staying put, the fact that the door is there and the building and the sort of box effect and so forth, and the time that you've got to. So in that time, hopefully the fire brigade are there and helping you out. But the notion of staying put in a building that's on fire probably sounds a bit counterintuitive.
It wasn't the right advice on the night of Grenfell Tower fire. The issue was with the stay-put policy. The fire brigade's rigid adherence. They'd only been trained for stay-put and had no plan to evacuate a high-rise building. So that policy wasn't fit for purpose in those circumstances. Gary can speak to whether it's fit for purpose in our circumstances, but it's also important that we challenge the fire brigade on what changes to their policy have they been made, and do they now have an alternative to the stay-put policy, and can they safely evacuate high-rise buildings now?
As we said earlier, our buildings, just to remind everyone, our buildings have been assessed as low risk. You know, no risk, but they are low risk. Got all the measures in place to contain fires, sprinkler systems. So generally, it's moving to a full evacuation policy it's not something that we're being advised of at the present time. It's still stay put. Obviously, unless the fire's in the property, then it's get out, shut the door, and the sprinklers will do their work, and then the fire service will attend and notify tenants as they're escaping. They're advised how to get out of the properties, which is why we're trying to raise this awareness now about, don't take things into the flat that could cause a problem. We're actually, one thing that we might not put in here, we are putting electronic signage as a pilot on one of our blocks, which is going to be like an information constant update on safety measures. Please don't forget this. So we're working with the units going in shortly, and then we're working with our press and publicity team to make sure that we're getting good snippets of information about things to do, things not to do, and where to report things. So that's the aim. If that works, then we're going to roll it out to the other high-rise buildings in the borough. But generally, it's stay put with the safety measures.
Yeah, I mean, this is a difficult one. And the other thing I was interested in, right at the beginning on page 5, Building Safety Act sets out safety requirements for landlords of high-risk residential buildings that are at least 18, is it meters? 18 M's, I presumed 18M is 18 metres, which doesn't sound terribly high. Oh, yeah. And then, or 7 stories high, which does sound quite high, with 2 or more residential units. Well, clearly that'll be more than that. 18 metres doesn't come easily from someone as short as me, but 18 metres doesn't sound desperately high. But anyway, that was just a...
They're the requirements, 18 metres or seven stories, and most of our blocks are over I think about 12 to 13 stories on the high-rise, seven on the new rise block that we've got.
And going back to what was being said earlier about the fire brigade's capacity to fight fires safely and successfully above certain levels. Again, in terms of, I don't know, equipment, I mean, that was one of the things that Grenfell showed, that they just didn't have the capacity to deal with it in one sense. But once you get above a certain height, is it not ever more difficult for the fire brigade to deal with it?
All high-rise buildings are required, so we've got, keep it we've got sprinklers, we've got dry riser installations which the fire service plug their tenders in at the bottom of the building. They're checked every 6 months to make sure that they're fit for purpose. Then what they'd normally do is they'd fight the fire from on an high-rise block, I think two floors down. That's where they'd get to, then fight the fire above that. But bear in mind, these buildings are concrete containment. They're containment boxes, which is why we've been insistent on fire. No punches through that containment. We're insistent on fire doors being third-party accredited, so they hold the fire back. Fire's in the property, tenants get out of the property, then any other tenants that are in the vicinity can either evacuate, or then they get to the common areas. The common areas, again, they've got another 30 minutes, which case the common areas and the properties have got active fire sprinkler systems in there. The alarms will be going off. So the design is sprinklers activate in the area of the fire to put the fire out. So that's why it's set to be a localised issue. And again, it'll be as I say, closed in the box, in the firebox. That's how they was all originally designed to build these buildings, which is, and then the measures we've applied are just enhancing that safety.
All right, thank you. Well, as has already been said, it's a really good report, and I think when you came to see us last time, we were impressed with where we as a borough were in any event, and this just sort of keeps that going. But we will want you to come back and see us another time. And sorry, Councillor Banerjee.
I just wanted to leave my question towards the end. I sort of agree with everything that other councillors have said around the table. Just out of interest, because it's very, just reading the sort of title of the report, it's the where is it gone? Give me a second. It's the building safety strategy for council-owned residential dwellings. So is there a similar strategy for non-residential properties?
No, we haven't got a strategy. That's something that's on our agenda. But I can assure you that all of our non-residential buildings have got fire risk assessments undertaken, and where necessary, obviously remedial works are undertaken. But generally, the main driver on this is residential. Social residential housing. That's our main focus, and where we've got buildings like this, like this has got a detailed fire evacuation strategy with set fire escape routes in the building. If ever you've been evacuated a building, so you've got quite designed from the original. The original designs were concrete evacuation shafts, stairways, and sprinklers to car park areas as well. No sprinklers in the building. And some of the newer buildings we've got, some of the care facilities have got sprinkler installations installed where appropriate. We are upgrading some of the fire doors if they're under fire risk assessment. If identified there's an issue and might not close, then we put them on our plan programme to replace them. So we're applying the same measures and learning that we've done on the housing stock to the corporate building stock where appropriate.
unless there are any other questions from any other councillors, that's really great, thank you. And thanks for all the work you're doing. It's great to know that we are pretty much ahead of the game on everything as far as our own buildings are concerned. There's still some challenges, and maybe it's a lot to do with education and getting to people and getting them together. And the trouble is, of course, that even though something terrible happens, there's then inevitably a kind of lull, isn't there, in kind of appreciation, because if nothing's happening, then you don't really worry. And but we need to be, and our tenants and lessees even need to be ever more aware for their own safety, let alone for those of their fellow residents. So thanks very much, that's great, thank you. All right, so that was item 5. Item 6, which starts on page 73, Grenfell Tower Inquiry Recommendations, Emergency Response Service Presentation. Okay.
Hello, that's me. So just a few observations on the input before me. There wasn't a natural progression for me to really come in and say some of the things I was thinking. So we've got to remember that there was a kaleidoscope of issues which allowed the Grenfell Tower fire to happen, okay? And one of them was the deregulation of the building industry. So we might be able to assure ourselves that we are doing everything that meets central government's regulations, but are those regulations robust enough? And what are we doing to challenge central government so that they can assure us the new regulations are robust enough that they won't allow another Grenfell Tower fire to happen? So who is effectively challenging central government on those issues, and who's taking ownership of that? I think that's of utmost importance, well beyond my pay grade, but I'd like to think that it's within the remit or the power or the ability of some of the people in this room. So it's really important that we continue to challenge central government on what they're doing to stop this happening again. Also, we've got to continue to challenge the London Fire Brigade. They do amazing things, and I work with them every day, and they are undoubtedly heroes, but we must remember that their strict adherence to the stay put policy did undoubtedly contribute to why the death toll was so much higher than it should have been, because they had no alternative and they were not trained in any other alternative than the stay put policy, which became very quickly unfit for purpose on the night of Grenfell Tower fire. So who's going to be challenging the London Fire Brigade leadership on alternatives to the stay put policy? And another thing, lastly, a plug on, you were speaking about what the London Fire Brigade do to engage with local residents about fire safety and awareness, and then the education piece. My service are working with H for All, you all know that charity I'm sure, and the Hillingdon Federation of Community Associations on bringing a community resilience workshop to the borough. It's happening here at the Council Chamber of Uxbridge Civic Centre on the 31st of March between 10:30 and 12:30, where we will have the London Fire Brigade as one of our speakers, speaking to community and voluntary groups about how they can plan for, respond to and recover from emergencies more effectively. So, a little plug for that event there.
Who gets invited to that?
So community and voluntary groups, anyone in the local borough can sign up. If you just type in Community Resilience Hillingdon, the registration link will pop up on Eventbrite, so you can register for a place on Eventbrite.
So individuals can come along?
Individuals can, residents can, businesses can, community groups, voluntary groups, faith leaders.
So should we be aiming it at any particular groups, do you think?
All of our communities, all of our groups.
Yeah.
That's great news. Okay, so I'll get on to the main bulk of my presentation there. Sorry, I went off on a bit of a tangent. So, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak about the resilience-related recommendations from the Grenfell Tower Inquiry Phase 2 report. This presentation is critical because these recommendations are designed to strengthen emergency preparedness, improve coordination, and ultimately save lives in the face of future incidents. I will outline the key high-level resilience-related recommendations and Hillingdon's current position against them, using a RAG rating to highlight where we are meeting expectations and where further action is needed. It is vital that we do everything we can to implement these recommendations, not just to comply with national expectations, but to ensure we are fully prepared to protect our residents and communities in times of crisis. It's important to note that I'm solely reporting on the resilience-related recommendations and not the recommendations relating to building safety and fire safety. Those were being addressed by other speakers like Gary. This slide provides a summary of the key resilience-related recommendations from the report and Hillingdon's current position against them, using a RAG rating to indicate progress. Red means we have significant work to do to meet the recommendation. Amber indicates that some progress has been made, but there are still gaps to address. And green shows that we are meeting the recommendation's requirements. As you can see, several areas remain in the red category, including the revision of London Local Authority Gold Guidance, training for chief executives, embedding resilience as an integral organisational responsibility, key worker arrangements, and immediate financial assistance arrangements for those affected by emergencies. These are critical areas that require urgent attention. We are making progress in other areas such as humanitarian assistance planning, electronic registration and collecting residents' data, and communication with affected residents, but there is still work to do. The only fully compliant area is public communications on emergencies, where we have established effective mechanisms to keep the public informed. This RAG status highlights the importance of continued effort and investment in resilience. Addressing these gaps is not just about meeting recommendations, it's about ensuring we are fully prepared to support and protect our communities in the event of a major incident. This recommendation that you can see on screen stems from the fact that on the night of the Grenfell Tower fire, the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea did not activate the London Local Authority Gold arrangements due to concerns about being perceived as weak. It highlights the need for chief executives and local authority leaders to fully understand their roles and responsibilities as they relate to emergency management, as well as the London Local Authority Gold or LAG system in emergencies. Historically, across London and locally, there has been a tendency to focus on short-term wins rather than long-term resilience investments. Training and exercising has often been deprioritised due to competing demands, which risks leaving decision makers, like our Council Golds, unprepared in a crisis. The actions that you can see outlined there to help us meet this recommendation include our Chief Executive seeking assurance from SELC, Chief Executives of London Councils, on the revision of LAG guidance, which boroughs across London have been assured is being done regionally by the London Standardisation Board, and reporting progress to our local Emergency Planning Board. However, a key challenge remains. Without clear leadership buy-in, locally and across London, there is a risk that revised guidance will not translate into meaningful improvements in preparedness. I'm also suggesting that all senior leaders in the Council, also known as our Council Golds, commit to attending at least one emergency planning exercise a year. This will help them to build their knowledge of emergency plans and provide the chance for my service to observe their ability to lead strategic meetings, manage conflicting priorities, and communicate effectively with stakeholders. It will also provide a platform to evaluate how they handle uncertainty, stress, and complex decision making. And this recommendation is linked to the recommendation on the next slide. London Local Authority Gold training for Chief Executives and Council Gold officers. London's Regional Training, Exercising and Lessons Board have been tasked with creating bespoke training for Local Authority Gold Incident Commanders. This is a welcome step forward, ensuring that those in leadership positions are equipped with the knowledge and confidence to act decisively when needed. However, training alone is not enough. If resilience is not prioritised within the organisation, leaders are unlikely to engage with the training and will remain unprepared to lead in a crisis. That's why two key actions have been identified and suggested by my service. First, requiring periodic refresher training for the Chief Executive to maintain their operational readiness, and second, ensuring that training records are maintained on our internal SharePoint, making it easier to track and enforce participation and accountability. The main challenge we face locally is engagement. We must instill a culture where resilience is a fundamental responsibility, not an optional extra. Chief executives and council goals have a duty to lead in a crisis, and that starts with making sure that they are properly trained to do so. Moving on to recommendation number 3. This recommendation stems from the failure of the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea to meet the basic needs of those displaced in the days following the Grenfell Tower fire. It highlighted the critical importance of local authorities having effective humanitarian assistance plans in place, supported by properly trained humanitarian assistance lead officers, or HALOs as we call them in London, and regularly testing these arrangements. Humanitarian assistance is a fundamental aspect of any emergency response, ensuring that those affected by major incidents receive the immediate and long-term support they need. While London has regional plans in place, there are clear areas for improvement, particularly in training and exercising those arrangements to make sure they're fit for purpose and we have the capability to implement those arrangements and the resources that we would need. To strengthen our approach, we have proposed several key actions. First, we recommend that 4 senior social care staff complete the HALO training, which is facilitated by the London Resilience Unit. Currently we've got 2, so we've got half of that. This will enhance our leadership capacity in delivering humanitarian support and ensuring we have trained officers ready to coordinate our response effectively. Second, we have suggested testing our humanitarian arrangements through regular exercises. One such exercise will be a live rest centre simulation later this year, which will also provide an opportunity to test our newly digitised reception and registration process developed by the Digital and Intelligence team, which collects residents' data after they've been impacted by an emergency. Additionally, we plan to hold a tabletop exercise for local authority staff who would play a role in humanitarian assistance. Positive progress has already been made in this area as we've commissioned Dr. Anne Eyre to deliver local humanitarian assistance training on the 13th of March. She's a sociologist specialising in the psychosocial aspects of major incidents, emergency planning and disaster management. She was instrumental in developing the Manchester Attack Support website and the Manchester Attack Support Group programme across England and Wales after the Arena attack in 2017. However, our ability to meet this recommendation is undermined by our issues with staffing, which remain a significant challenge. A protracted major incident like Grenfell is resource intensive and our current capacity is insufficient. With only 8 emergency response officers available, we would struggle to sustain a response beyond a single shift, let alone for the 48-hour period expected under the resilience standards for London. Our emergency response officers are trained to support on-scene operations alongside the emergency services, like evacuations, attend multi-agency coordination meetings with the emergency services on scene, staff our Borough Emergency Control Centre, or BEC, where at least 5 officers are required for full functionality, and resource emergency centres for displaced residents. Given the demands of a major incident, we must expand our emergency response officer team and remove barriers to recruitment to ensure we have the necessary resources in place. The vacancies for those positions have been blocked on our recruitment system for 7 months. To further enhance our preparedness, we are looking to broaden British Red Cross Emergency Centre training by offering it to all local authority council staff. This would increase our organisational resilience and ensure that we have more personnel who would be equipped to step in if required. However, we do acknowledge the challenges that we face. The financial pressures on local government mean that fewer staff are managing increasing responsibilities, leaving limited capacity for additional training. Despite these constraints, it is crucial that we prioritise humanitarian assistance preparedness to ensure that in times of crisis we can provide the necessary support to those in need. The next recommendation relates to local authorities regarding resilience as an integral part of their responsibilities, as this was not the case at the time of Grenfell Tower fire. Like many local authorities, Hillingdon are stretched thin, balancing multiple priorities such as social care, housing and financial pressures. Emergency planning is rarely seen as urgent until an incident happens. Senior leaders tend to be more focused on immediate service delivery rather than long-term resilience. It is important that we frame emergency planning as a core enabler of other priorities rather than a competing demand, showing how poor resilience leads to service disruption, reputational damage and financial costs. Many decision makers and frontline staff may not fully understand why resilience matters until they experience a crisis. They tend to view emergency planning as someone else's job, rather than an integrated part of the council's responsibilities. Unlike frontline services, where poor performance results in immediate complaints or scrutiny, gaps in emergency preparedness may not be exposed until it's too late, like in the case of Grenfell. Changing local authority culture to embed resilience as an organisational responsibility requires a strategic and sustained approach. Some key actions that can drive a shift in culture relate to leadership buy-in and commitment, policy integration and communication. One change which I'm suggesting is incorporating emergency management duties into job descriptions of local authority staff. And as of Wednesday the 26th of February 2025, all managers have been instructed to include a line relating to this in all new job descriptions going forwards. However, I would like to see this added to the job descriptions of appropriate existing staff too. In terms of communication, consistent messaging across the organisation is important. Regular communication to help staff understand the importance and relevance of resilience is vital, and our emergency planning board, chaired by Tony Zayman, will be used as a vehicle to consistently drive this forward. To this end, my service have just released 3 engaging, short, explanatory videos on emergency management. These videos explain why and how the council prepares for emergencies, and they are aimed at all local authority staff and are designed to be accessible, simple and clear to understand for any member of staff, and we're in the process of trying to get these uploaded to our council intranet page so they can be viewed by all council staff, and having our own section on the intranet page as well. Recommendation 5 addresses the lack of an effective system within the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea for collecting and recording information about those displaced from the tower and surrounding buildings, including missing persons. Gathering accurate information in such situations is, of course, inherently challenging, and the difficulties faced by local authorities will vary depending on the nature of the emergency. To address this, all local authorities have been advised to establish methods for obtaining and recording this information, preferably in electronic format, and to regularly test these systems under different emergency situations. In response to this recommendation, our service has collaborated with the digital and intelligence team to develop a digital version of our reception and registrations forms, which will be used to collect residents' information following an emergency. Later this year, we will test these forms in a live rest centre exercise to ensure they are effective, fit for purpose and well understood by those who may need to use them. This will support the transition from traditional paper-based methods to a more efficient digital system, which will enable sharing of that data in a quicker capability as well. This recommendation suggests that all local authorities make reasonably practicable arrangements to enable them to place people in temporary accommodation at short notice and in ways that meet their personal, religious and cultural requirements. These arrangements should, as far as possible, involve local providers of social housing. I have received verbal assurances during meetings with housing colleagues that Hillingdon could deliver this if we needed to. In response, I asked housing to formalise these arrangements into a short written plan which could be used by emergency response staff. Written emergency plans ensure clarity, accountability and consistency, reducing the risk of miscommunication in a crisis. They enable cross-team coordination and scalability for large-scale incidents. A documented plan provides a reliable reference, supports staff training, and allows for testing and improvement to enhance response effectiveness. Last week I received a draft of this plan and have suggested some recommendations for improvement. Once a final draft has been created, this will be taken to the Emergency Planning Board for approval from our Chief Exec and circulated to all local authority emergency management staff for their awareness. In the days following the fire, those impacted experienced difficulties in obtaining financial support, and this caused particular resentment. At present, Hillingdon has no framework for distributing immediate financial assistance to those impacted by emergencies. I've suggested that the finance team create a plan. I've suggested setting up a £100,000 emergency relief fund to assist families affected by incidents, with tiered support based on the scale of the event. For small incidents of up to 50 families, there will be around £1,000 worth of support per family. For moderate incidents impacting 51 to 100 families, there will be around £750 worth of support per family. And for large incidents impacting over 100 families, there will be around £500 of support per family to stretch resources. Of course, these arrangements will be flexible and should be adapted based on the specific needs, individual circumstances and the emergency at hand. An application process will be designed. It will be simple, with a short form completed by council staff at emergency centres, collecting family details and proof of residence if possible. Payments will be made via prepaid debit cards. A centralised database will track family details, assistance provided, verification documents and follow-up actions, with unique reference numbers for each family. Regular reports will be made to monitor fund distribution and the remaining balance. We have made good progress in drafting a vision for what we'd like our plans to look like. However, it will take time to put this together, as many different council services are involved and it involves a large sum of money. It will be subject to a vigorous approvals process, but we do need finance to take ownership of this arrangement and to prioritise it. This next recommendation emphasises the importance of local authorities carefully assessing the availability of key workers to ensure that appropriate arrangements are in place to maintain continuity of support to residents and communities during times of crisis. The role of key workers is crucial, particularly in situations where vulnerable individuals require consistent care and assistance, and it is essential that local authorities proactively plan for this. To address this, I've proposed that social care colleagues develop a comprehensive plan that outlines the key worker role and responsibilities and who will fulfil these roles. This plan will provide clarity on the critical functions that these key workers need to fulfil, ensuring they are equipped to respond effectively when needed. Once this framework is in place, my service can facilitate the necessary training and exercises to prepare key workers for their roles in emergencies. However, the challenges in accomplishing this are significant. Social care teams are facing competing demands on their time and resources. They are already stretched thin with daily case management. In addition to these ongoing responsibilities, social care staff must navigate resourcing issues, including staff shortages and high turnover rates, which can complicate their ability to focus on planning for future crises. These challenges are further exacerbated by the increasing complexity of social care landscapes, including changes in policies, funding constraints, and the growing needs of an ageing population. As a result, social care colleagues may struggle to allocate the time and attention needed to develop and implement a robust key worker policy. Ensuring continuity of support during emergencies requires overcoming these barriers and will need strategic collaboration between social care, emergency planning and other partners to secure the resources and support necessary for success. The next recommendation focuses on ensuring that we have the capability to effectively communicate with residents in a variety of languages, tailored to the needs of the communities affected, as this was lacking in the event of Grenfell Tower fire. Currently, we lacked provisions for delivering our communications in languages other than English. To address this, I have tasked our Head of Communications with engaging with the London Heads of Communications Group to explore how other boroughs are fulfilling this requirement and to identify any existing best practices that we can adopt. Additionally, I will be collaborating with local community and voluntary groups to assess the availability of translation and interpreting support that we could leverage within our own borough to enhance our communication efforts. This approach will help ensure that all residents, regardless of language, receive the critical information they need in an accessible and timely manner. And lastly, this recommendation relates to using a range of communication methods which are likely to be affected for any areas and groups impacted by emergencies. I've rated this area as green due to our existing Communications Emergency Response Plan, which outlines the variety of ways we will communicate with residents in an emergency, which includes media, local, national, international, via press releases and statements, our council website, externally and locally and internally our intranet, our e-newsletter to which 35,000 residents are subscribed, social media, messages through councillors like yourselves, MPs, business groups, faith, resident and community groups and where necessary schools, our contact centre, leaflets and other publicity material. This plan will be reviewed every 2 years or sooner if used during the response to an emergency. As we move forward, it's critical that we stay focused on the next steps to strengthen our emergency management arrangements. We must prioritise addressing the red recommendations. This includes ensuring that we align with the LAG guidance, develop comprehensive training programmes, establish financial assistance arrangements, clearly define key worker roles, and develop and maintain a robust resilience culture within our organisation. These actions will form the foundation for a more resilient and coordinated response to emergencies. We need to strengthen interdepartmental collaboration and training initiatives. The complexities of emergency management require a united approach, with all departments working seamlessly together. By enhancing our internal collaboration and focusing on joint training opportunities, we can ensure that all teams are better prepared to respond to incidents effectively and efficiently. Additionally, we must prioritise securing the necessary funding and resources which will be crucial for implementing the necessary changes. This includes not only ensuring that we have the financial backing to support our plans, but also we have the right tools, systems and personnel in place to make those plans a reality. It's important that we look at both short-term and long-term resource needs so we can build a sustainable and effective emergency response framework. Finally, we must regularly test and update our emergency response plans. Emergency preparedness is an ongoing process, not a one-time task. Through regular testing and updates, we can ensure that our plans remain relevant, reflect the latest risks, and are continually refined based on lessons learned from exercises and real-world events. This is key to maintaining a state of readiness and ensuring that we are always prepared to respond swiftly and appropriately. By focusing on these next steps, we will ensure that we are building a more resilient, collaborative and well-resourced emergency management system that is ready to meet the challenges of the present and the future. Thank you very much for your time. Do you have any questions?
Whoosh. Okay. I don't know where to start, really. What sort of incidents, and I've jotted some down which are obvious, I suppose. One of the problems in trying to meet concerns and more than concerns against things that A, you hope won't happen, and B, are are likely on current experience to happen once in a blue moon sort of thing, is the inevitable, and by no means sort of negligent or reckless or deliberate leaving it to one side. It's just a kind of mental state. And also at a time when you've already identified where local authority finance is on its knees. And also at a time when we're being encouraged ever more to rely on digital processes rather than people. So you've got a perfect storm in a sense of, and a storm could be a event I suppose, but a perfect storm of problems and of likely as not, and again not in any deliberate way, but negative responses as it were, to do what you've set out. And what I have to say, for my part at least, what you've set out has been absolutely fascinating and stunning. But to do that would require us to be at the absolute pinnacle of our financial inputs, which we're not. It would need a greater staff than a greater number of staff than most authorities could ever afford. So inevitably it would need doubling up, because of course what you're inevitably doing, I don't mean you, what those staff are inevitably doing is doing another job and then needing to do this as well, just in case, as it were. However, I go back to the pandemic, and our response to that, I thought, was pretty good in these terms, that within a relatively short period of time, people who couldn't go to work because work was cut down were recruited to do other things, like deliver medicines to people. We had a fairly swift food distribution service in the centre downstairs. What's it called? The suite downstairs. Middlesex Suite. Of course it's the Middlesex Suite. And some of us, especially the councillors who couldn't go to work because our work was shut down, were buzzing all over the borough delivering food and medicines and post-operative stuff and all the rest of it. And it was a really swift response. And a lot of the staff were turned into emergency workers pretty quickly. So a kind of capacity to respond to something is reasonably well inbred already, in one sense. But I go back to your first recommendations. No, that's three. Where's the first one? Oh, here we go. And I got the impression, I'm probably wrong, I got the impression that in some ways it was a two-way street. In other words, our senior folks may be not able to do stuff because people elsewhere aren't doing their thing to help them. So your LLAG operations and what kind of pan-London stuff was going on, and a lot of letters I didn't understand. There may be a deficiency in terms of what our senior folk can have been doing or able to do, but equally is there a deficiency in what the next level up or the broader level is able to give to them?
So I'm aware there was quite a lot to respond to in what you just said there. One thing I will say, and what Grenfell highlighted, and what you so perfectly suggested the pandemic highlighted, risk should not be based on likelihood, but also consequence. How likely did we think in our lifetime that a pandemic flu was, a global pandemic flu? And therefore central government didn't plan for it, did they? And they didn't act on their own recommendations from their own national pandemic flu exercise. And as a result of that, potentially tens of thousands of more people died than would have done if our government had been better prepared to respond to that pandemic flu. So I would say emergency planning has not just got to be based on likelihood, but it's got to be based on consequence, because the deaths from COVID taught us that's what we've got to do. In terms of, we haven't got the finances, central government finances are local government finances are in a terrible place, I would say, well, that's where we challenge central government for a more adequate funding model, so that we've got more money available to do these important things. So where's the robust challenge on central government about our funding? And I wouldn't say our hands are tied behind our backs. There's lots of different things we can do, like thinking outside the box, like with our emergency centres training, offering that out to all local authority staff, so that all of our staff can potentially, as you said we do in COVID, be redeployed to support emergency response. So yes, if we've got staffing constraints, let's think outside the box with initiatives like that, for example. What other points did you raise? I've probably forgotten. Those are just some of the notes I made, but I think I've responded to pretty much everything. Oh, in terms of regional arrangements, yes, we have regional arrangements. Our hands aren't tied behind our back. We should always be looking at, whilst the regional arrangements are being formed, what can we do locally? We're not just going to sit back and not do anything because we're waiting for somebody else to do something. What can we do in the meantime? Also, the LAG guidance and the LAG chief exec training, for example, can be commissioned. There is training chief execs have always been able to commission themselves from the College of Policing, which is what the regional London arrangements are going to be creating. They're creating their own London bespoke version of training that's already available. So there's lots of different ways to plug the gaps.
No, I'll call on Councillor Mather in a minute, but going back to one of my earlier points, what sort of, is there a kind of like a list of emergencies against which we might be ensuring, as it were, in terms of these areas that you've spoken about? Obviously, we think of fire and you think of Grenfell. That's a lot of people in one place. And what I remember about that in particular was the I don't know how to put it, rabbit in headlights reaction by some people who were being interviewed in the aftermath. What's happening about this? What's happening about that? And people didn't know. In some ways, and the sort of emergencies and the sort of disasters come in presumably different sizes, because you may not need to find, I don't know, space for 200 or 300 people all of a sudden in relation to every emergency. It might be a small emergency. It might be equally I don't know, heaven forbid everything, but it might be something on the tube or that comes into the area. So I think in terms of the scale, Grenfell was a really big issue. It really was. Well, more than I would say. I don't know what above major is, but I would, general. But that makes it sound less. But that was significant, very, very, very significant. So I guess not all emergencies are going to involve so many people, which would trigger the sort of response that you've talked about here.
Yeah, absolutely. So Grenfell Tower was declared a major incident. So that's the terminology that we use in emergency management, response and resilience. So it was declared a major incident. So yeah, of course, emergencies will vary on size, scale and complexity. Everything I've been talking about here, all these arrangements are designed to be flexible, scalable and tailored to the needs of the emergency at hand.
Councillor Mather.
Thank you, Chair. It's definitely a lot to consider, and I really, I don't know if this is I don't want this to sound patronising at all, but you're in the right role in that you've got that drive to make the what if in everybody else's mind, the right now. And I really commend you for that. This is, I think, the second or third time I've heard you speak on emergency preparations, and we're really fortunate in Hillingdon to have someone who's, and I'm sure your team are as well, fervently placed and ready to take this challenge on. I was looking through the recommendations in the hope that I might be able to contribute something that would help the reds turn amber. I've got some of the ambers that may get a little bit less amber, but beyond that it's not a lot of help, because I do agree with the chair that the first two is around our collective effort across London, and it is good to see that the Mayor of London, for example, has funded things like the community resilience to build the voluntary sector and spaces and places into part of our planning. And I know that in austere times, voluntary sector and other agencies that are very much grassroots, there isn't a lot of money or resource to equip and enable. So this is a really helpful strand, whilst as well you have the support of the LLAG to build in some of those things. I think my thinking was, what can we do differently as a council to mitigate some of the things that we can't do perfectly? So, for example, part of the financial strategy, politics aside, part of the financial strategy is around managed vacancy rates, which means that vacancies won't get filled because financially it's a challenge. So is there a way of sharing EROs with other boroughs and just building that, while every local authority in London is struggling, going, well, what if we cross-pollination may not be the right word, but we just shared ideas of what happens in your borough, what happens in our borough, you've got 4, we've got 4, that means 8. So on the hope that we don't get a major incident or whatever in both areas, let's equip each other. And hopefully that would provide a little bit more resilience so that it can be sustained beyond that one shift, for example. The other things for me were thinking around, I think that the one that worries me the most is the key worker arrangements, because I think with the others there will be mitigations, there will be solutions, there will be ways in which you can drive forward some bettering of that. In a sector that is under extreme demand with diminished resource, I mean, the day-to-day is a struggle in that area. I don't know what the solution is, and that's a horrible failing of myself maybe, but I think it probably needs more like this kind of political cross-party thought. It probably needs a lot more local, regional and national government thought to say, we know that there's not going to be to use the phrase, a magic money tree, but what else can be done differently to relieve the emergency situations when it comes to needing key workers and managing that demand. I mean, if we suddenly saw, let's take a major incident aside in terms of the risk of life and all those things, but suddenly 200 displaced people in our borough. The impact right now in a housing crisis, which everybody's doing everything they can. I can't see. I'm sure you've got plans, but I can't see how you could help those people find emergency accommodation, let alone settled accommodation in the near future when they've got jobs and school and maybe elderly relatives and others they need to care for. So I think it's extremely challenging right now. It may not be challenging like this forever, but I just wonder if there's more that can be done with more heads thinking, in that general bubble of ideas, rather than just all the pressure being put on one smaller team who are massively punching above their weight in terms of getting the importance of emergency planning at the forefront. Sorry, that's a little bit more speechy than it is helpful, but I just this makes or breaks councils, right? And none of us politically, whatever side or shade of colour we are, want to see this council fail, like the unfortunate events that happened in Kensington and Chelsea. We don't want to see that. So whatever can be done, whatever ideas we can come up with, and more funding is always an easier thing to call for. It's not always forthcoming from whatever government, but I do think that there's got to be more conversation maybe amongst members and amongst us in our communities around what people can do in these, because we're not going to get, or hopefully not going to get, a pandemic-sized event that gets that national reaction that we saw. We're going to get lots of smaller, micro, localised level, town-to-town sort of events that still need that resilience.
No, I was just going to, just picking up on what Councillor Mather said. I don't think, I may be wrong, I don't think any council in London could do all this on their own. Because we're all pretty much in the same boat, and some are much worse than others. No. Well, you say that, but I still remember really vividly when people on Kensington and Chelsea, and it could have been anybody in sense because there's high-rise blocks all over the place, it was really hard for individuals, whether it was councillors or officers who were put before the cameras, to kind of get a grip of what was happening because it was so terrible. And I thought then, I wonder how quickly London councils have come in, how the LGA has come in, for a much broader help response, because it's a bit like being in shock. You need someone maybe to bring you the sweet tea to be able to get on. And again, another example was in the pandemic. The initial reaction came from the voluntary sector, and the actual delivery of medication, so for people who couldn't get to pharmacies or the hospital to get their medication. And a whole bunch of people were signed up to deliver the medication. And initially we were literally all over the place. I mean, zigzagging the borough. And then we discovered that one of our number was a logistics expert. And within half a day, that operation was so smooth because that logistics expert knew how to go, right, there's so many chemists over here and these people, and the demand is from here, we'll send all our deliverers to this area first, but because some of them live in the south and need to go to the north, we'll give the people from the north stuff to do. In other words, they knew how to do logistics, as opposed to just say, right, John Riley, you go from Ruislip to Heathrow Villages 3 times, which is great fun. So, a register of abilities amongst councillors, let alone officers who do the job anyway. What skills have we got that could be brought to bear pretty quick in such a set of circumstances? In another sphere, this committee is doing a thing about spaces, buildings that we have, knowledge of building assets. I immediately think of the 16 libraries we've got. If you needed to house a bunch of people very quickly, I mean temporarily for a few days maybe, you could clear the shelves of the libraries and stick them in the libraries. It's space, it's warm, if they've got loos there, you could put them in there. So, and the other thing is sharing with neighbouring boroughs. Because we all pretty much, and I do a lot of work with the LGA and across London, so, if 2 or 3 boroughs have all had to look at their staffing levels, between them they've still got staff, so maybe if one of them has got an emergency, the other 2 come winging in to help. So mutual assistance, mutual aid, whatever. But a coordinated. So you say to different boroughs, right, you 3 are together, you 3 are together. And it doesn't matter whether, what the political colour is. If it's an emergency, you chip in. Maybe.
So I'm aware there was a lot there, so I probably won't have remembered every point. So to go back to the point, what can we do now? We're not immediately going to get any more money, vacancies aren't going to be filled. The ERO vacancies I spoke to you about cost the authority £0 more because they are staff that we already pay to be on call 365 days of the year, 24/7. So by not allowing my service to recruit more, there is no cost saving. I'm just paying a smaller amount of people, 8, to be on call 24/7. So holding those vacancies up on our recruitment system saves no money. So why has that been held up? That's why I made a point to raise it here. Why hasn't that been unblocked for the last 7 months? It's not allowing a cost saving, it's not. So that's not justifiable, is it? There isn't a legitimate excuse. No one in the local authority has been able to provide to me a legitimate reason Why, when it costs us no more money to recruit those officers, we're not doing it? So there's that. We can do that. That's something we can do that isn't going to cost us any more money. In terms of, yes, other resources, like you quite rightly said, mutual aid, but we've had established local and regional mutual aid procedures across London for many years now. So we already do that. So it's not an option we don't explore or we won't employ. We already have established arrangements. So yes, we will use mutual aid, and yes, of course, we have sub-regional conversations with our resilience counterparts via our West London Regional Resilience Board, where I meet with all of my counterparts and we discuss all things like, how are you guys meeting these recommendations across West London? And West London comprises of Westminster, the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, Harrow, Hounslow, Ealing, Brent and Hammersmith and Fulham. So there's 7 other partners we meet with quarterly to discuss things like this. So we've already got good established relationships to share resources. So that is something we definitely already do, just to give you a bit of an assurance piece. In relation to your key worker point, it's important to note that key workers don't need to come from social care. Key workers can come from any local authority service and from other agencies. They don't have to solely be local authority staff. However, social care are best placed to create the plan because they have the best knowledge of how to meet humanitarian requirements post-emergency. So we don't have to take from that already stretched resource, but we do need their input to lead on putting the plan together about what does a key worker require, who's going to fulfil those roles, what are their responsibilities, how much capacity have we got to provide those, where will they come from, and to get the relevant agencies together to perhaps take key workers from the NHS, for example, as opposed to local authority. Accommodation arrangement, yes, of course. Sorting out the longer term accommodation post-emergency would be a huge challenge for any local authority, but we're doing what we can to work with organisations to try and bridge some of that gap. And I know in Ealing they're doing a lot with Premier Inn to get live access to all of the Premier Inns across London to see what room availability they've got and what that looks like, so that local authorities can block book in the event of an emergency Premier Inn hotels and rooms. There's lots of thinking outside the box. And you're absolutely right about community resilience and tapping into community resources. We know from the UK's Government Resilience Framework, which was published in 2022, that we're going towards a whole of society approach to resilience, whereby we need to involve the community. And what did we see in Grenfell Tower fire? The community and the voluntary groups stepped in immediately to fill the void, and they came together and they gave the community everything they needed. So we've got to move towards developing community resilience. Hillingdon's done none of that in the past because we haven't had the resources. It's only thanks to the LGA's Community Resilience Fund and some funding we've managed to secure that we are working with HRUL and the Hillingdon Federation of Community Associations to bring together this first workshop that we've initiated. But how are we going to sustain that? And what we're going to do at that workshop is create an asset map. So we've designed a community mapping survey of all the groups that attend to ask them, what resources do you have that we can use in an emergency? Community halls or spaces for rest centres or space to store donated goods, showers, toilets, 4x4 vehicles, interpretation and translation services. So we're going to map what resources we can harness that are already out there in the community that will probably cost us nothing or minimum cost. So those are the ways we're trying to step outside the box and say, okay, there's no more money, what else can we do? And community resilience is a really good way to do that, but it still does require some level of investment and resource from the local authority to develop that and harness that and maintain that. And my team, until January, was just me, it was one person. And now it's 2, so the capacity has gone up significantly. But that is really hard for a team of 2 to maintain those relationships and those networks and to do all that work. But yeah, community resilience is a big answer to step into some of these funding voids and resourcing voids in local authority.
Thank you. I mean, we could have dealt with this in a whole meeting. So I have to push it on a bit. But I'll take a question from Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you again. Echo Councillor Macer's comments that I remember the last time you came to present to us. And it was a really powerful witness session, and you're exactly the type of person we need, who's got the drive, but also the confidence to shine a light on the council, as well as being part of it, to kind of move us forward. And I don't know if anybody else is watching the Lockerbie drama on Sky, about halfway through that, but that is another good case study from best part of 40 years ago of all of the things that the local community had to respond to completely unexpectedly. And I think if there is some positive to come out of the Grenfell tragedy, it's that the recommendation, not just around fire safety, but this whole much broader local authorities, resilience, emergency planning. And I just wanted to echo some of the things that you were saying. If I think around my day job in the private sector and my employer, of how over the last 15 years there's kind of been a transformation around embedding resilience in people. It is in job descriptions, it's mandatory objectives, it's everybody has to play a part. You have to go through training, there are activations, we look at case studies, there's recency checks to handle emergencies, disruption, whatever. And I just wanted to restate that point, that actually I think that is the way forward, is that everybody who's an employee of the local authority who isn't operational has some role to play in helping mitigate and manage our response to disruption and emergencies. How far away do you think we are from that? And because it is a complete culture change, and it's taken 15 years, if I think of my day job, for us to get there. How can we help move that forward? And what more do you need?
So I'll start by saying that cultural change within any organisation takes years. There is no quick way to change the organisational culture. So I don't want to do a disservice to Hillingdon by saying that won't be a quick win or a short-term goal we can achieve. But I think a lot of it has got to do with the top, right? So we need the leadership and our council gold commanders to have the will to do this and to make the decisions that need to be made. Because I will say there are sometimes there's issues with the decision making that can hold up a lot of what my service needs to get done. So it's pushing our senior leaders to make decisions. Is what I would say.
No, thank you. And just one final point, I guess maybe through the chairman, the committee can escalate just the matter around the ERO and the recruitment to the respective cabinet member, just so that lands up on the right person's table.
There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, so somebody will have a chat. All right, look, as I say, we could easily have done a whole session on this. So thank you so much, and we will get you back so we can go into a bit more detail and to understand things even better. But it's clearly a big area, and you're doing a terrific job. Thank you very much. Right, team, we're going to note items 7 and 8, the forward plan and the work programme, because we've all read it. Sure. And we're now going to go into part 2. Oi, hello.
Just quickly on the work plan. In the budget we heard that CIFRA were coming in to look at finance and to review things and support the team to build capacity to make sure they can do all the things within the audit report. As finance is in our thing, we don't need an answer today, but I wonder if it could be something that we could consider about them or finance providing part 1, part 2 in future meetings, so that we understand what improvements have been made or will be made from those recommendations.
Yeah, ping me an email about that. All right. So as I say, apart from that, we'll note 7 and 8, and we'll go into part 2. Have you already?
No.
Okay. Wow. I mean, just wow.